I'd like to call this meeting to order. The September 22nd, 2021 regular meeting of the Schertz Planning and Zoning Commission. Item 1 was the call to order. Item 2 is to seat an alternate to act if required. We have Commissioner Goldick with us this evening. Item 3, hearing of residents. We have one person signed up here, and I think it's Rob Dye. Is that right? Now, well, let me give you a choice. Okay, because I'm going to say that's a public hearing, but since you signed up, you can speak now and then, or you can... All right, sir. Very good. Thank you. So no one else signed up. We'll move on to item 4, the consent agenda. Looks like just one item this evening, the minutes from the September 8th, 2021 regular meeting. Do those need to be pulled for discussion? If not, do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve consent agenda.
I'll second it.
All right, I have a motion to approve from Commissioner Haynes, and it was Commissioner Odom second. There's no discussion on consent agenda. I'll call the vote.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 6 ayes, none opposed. That motion passes. Item 5, a public hearing. Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing related to zone change requests and replats within this agenda. The public hearing will be open to receive a report from staff, the applicant, the adjacent property owners affected by the applicant's request, and any other interested persons. On completion, the public hearing will be closed. The Commission will discuss and consider the application and may request additional information from staff or the applicant if required. After deliberation, the Commission is asked to consider and act upon the following requests and make a recommendation to the City Council if necessary. So item 5A is a public hearing on PC 2021-036. Conduct a public hearing to amend the Schertz Code of Ordinances, Unified Development Code, Article 5, subsection 21.5.8, permitted use table to add aggregate extraction. Megan?
Good evening, Commission. So this is for PC 2021-036. Megan Harrison, planner. So we're going to spend a majority of our time on this slide as the applicant is here and does have a presentation to provide as well. So per the UDC section 21.5.8C3 of the UDC, it is recognized that the permitted use table chart may require an amendment from time to time to allow for uses that are not currently in there right now. So with this property, here is just kind of for reference, this is Lower Seguin Road, and this is the property outlined in green. And then the red line is indicating the City of Schertz city limits line. So staff was approached by the property owner about a use that involves removing significant amount of vegetation and topsoil from the property, but as well as bringing in soil to the property. This use is not listed in the UDC, so we're calling it aggregate extraction. So staff is proposing to do the UDC amendment to the permitted use table to allow this use, but to also indicate which zoning district that we would allow this type of use in. So the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, does require that aggregate production operations are required to register with them. So they would have to do that through TCEQ automatically. Aggregates are commonly recognized as construction material, crushed or broken down limestone, crushed and broken down granite, construction sand, gravel, soil, those kinds of materials. Staff would define the aggregate extraction as to remove soil or to remove a type of material from a property. So whether that be, stone, sand, gravel, dirt, soil, or caliche, or any kind of addition to that. So in making this recommendation, we looked at other districts that would, allow aggregate extraction. So staff looked at, kind of, for example, a concrete batching plant, which is right now in kind of the M2 zoning district. And so we kind of looking at that in a sense of, has dust. It's going to have dust from the concrete being created. It's going to have noise from the heavy equipment that comes on and off the site, and so that use is permitted within the M2 zoning. The aggregate extraction wouldn't be as much of a extreme, I guess you could say, as a concrete batching plant, because it is very, very noisy, very much heavy traffic with people trying to get in and out of there with, concrete trying to get to a certain location. So the aggregate extraction would have some of the same concerns with the dust and maybe some minor noise due to the heavy equipment, but it isn't as intense as that concrete batching plant. So due to the nature of the proposed use, aggregate extraction, and with the concerns of the dust and the noise being from the heavy equipment, staff feels that it would be appropriate to allow this use within the manufacturing light district with an SUP, and then be permitted by right within the manufacturing heavy district M2. So with that, Commission, I will turn it over to the applicant, who does have a presentation as well. Speak into the mic.
Hi, I'm one of the property owners, EA, and just go by my initials, EA. Last name is Buckholtz. This is Jeff Smith.
With RTM Construction, so we're going to be performing the aggregate extraction if this does move forward.
And this is, well, it's pretty much the same slide that Megan just showed you. The only thing I included, other than the boundary, is we have this little orange line here. This would be a perimeter of where all the extraction would be. There'd be, what, a 5-foot berm, I think as you guys call it. Right, that would, so you have at least a 50-foot setback from the property boundary. And this is all under Zone GB. This section here, this little triangle, is currently residential agriculture. And this little green line up here, this is a easement that we have from Lower Seguin Road to the property. It goes, well, this property was originally owned by my great-grandfather, and the easement was established in 1923. And our renter on the property still utilizes that easement. I could tell by looking at slide Megan had up there, you could actually see where he still crosses that easement from Lower Seguin Road. Blow this up. Whoops. Yeah, this is the letter of no objection. I don't know if I can bring that up here. This letter of no objection from Randolph, they issued it to us in July with a few conditions. I don't know if you all have already seen this, so I don't think I have to go through it.
No, sir, unless someone in the audience has some questions, we've all seen it.
This is just some general verbiage that we put up here on sort of how the property, how the project would move forward. I'm going to let Jeff, can you talk about that a little bit? Since you're...
I can. So the whole idea behind this...
If you would, sir, just a little closer to the microphone. You don't have to,
yeah,
but just a little closer so they can hear you, and it's being streamed, in case, just so you know.
The main objective behind proposing this to the city of Schertz is we have an overlay district over this property from the runway of Randolph, and so that prevents this property from being developed into a subdivision. Right now it's a pretty hilly region, and so we're proposing to extract some of the material out and use it on other areas in Schertz or surrounding communities. and then to overall ultimately flatten out that, call it a crash zone, so where it's not so hilly and it makes it a better, more advantageous and more usable for the city, for Randolph Air Force Base. So that is the kind of the overall intent behind this. And so we're trying to find a way to work through the city's UDC code of ordinances to determine if we can or cannot proceed forward. So ultimately, we'll have a few machines on site. I don't think we'll be having any kind of crushers on site that's going to generate a huge amount of noise or dust. We will have a few excavators and truck traffic coming in and out, bringing material in and out, both just depending on the need or the availability of the product that we may be pulling out. So you're not going to have a whole lot of people there. You won't have a lot of activity at night. It's going to be all during the day, usually a Monday through Friday operation. You may have a vacancy for a couple of months, maybe a year, nothing goes on, and then all of a sudden you'll have a project that takes off next, within this region, and then it'll propose a need for this material, either A, to dig it out, or B, to bring in and fill in to ultimately smooth out and level out the property. So what we're proposing is to have at least a 50-foot buffer around the outside of the property to keep the natural vegetation the same. We don't want to necessarily excavate right up to somebody's property line or houses. There's an existing gas line. So we're going to keep some sort of vegetated buffer to prevent, people from just walking off the Ware-Seguin Road or wherever else straight into an excavation pit, so to speak. We're going to put a berm around that pit so that you technically have to climb up the berm with a knowledgeable, intent to be able to fall over into an excavated pit. So it's as a deterrent to keep people out of it. I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell. That's what we're proposing.
And initially, we would probably start excavating on that yellow line right there.
Right.
And go from sort of from east to west.
Right.
Along the the extent of the property. And you'd have maybe a couple of pits open at any given time. I guess it's going to depend on demand
They
and
will.
need and whatever in the area. And that just explains a little bit about
The depths and the size of the
Right,
of the
pit.
excavation pit, and just the overall process.
Oh, another thing, and Jeff may have mentioned that, there's a lot of, well, not a lot, there's several acres of pasture land on the property, and we're looking at probably knocking all that down to also do excavation in that area, which would be of benefit to Randolph. They would love that, I know, you told me that, so.
Right. So we will obtain all the necessary permits through TCEQ and post all the stormwater and take care of all the stormwater issues that we could foresee happening on the site, just like any normal project would. And this is a kind of a blown-up version of an access easement. We plan on bringing most of the vehicles, truck traffic, construction traffic, through the Lower Seguin Road entrance, not off of Ware Seguin Road, straight onto the TxDOT. So we'll get a TxDOT driveway access permit for this project.
And that would minimize traffic, or shove most of the traffic to Lower Seguin Road and keep it to a minimum on Ware Seguin Road, which goes through or by a couple of subdivisions.
Right. And that should be it.
All right, gentlemen, well, thank you. And I'm sure you'd be willing, if anyone has questions, I'm sure you'll be willing to help us out there, right? Okay.
Try to.
All right, thank you. Well, at this time, I'll open the meeting for public comment. Anyone wishing to address the commission? at this time on this topic is welcome to do so. Nobody? I really thought this one would bring some folks out. No? One more time, anybody? All right, public input is closed. Commissioners?
I have a couple questions, if I could. What kind of soil are you excavating? Is it dirty soil? Contaminated soil, replacing it with clean soil? Are you a sanitizing type of a deal, where you bring in contaminated soil and you bake it and sanitize it to go back out again?
So to answer your question, the top 12 or so feet, we've done a couple of boring samples out there. The top 12 or so feet is high plasticity clays, so it'd be used for topsoil, landscaping materials. There's a middle section in there that's a lower PI clay section, approximately 14 to 16 feet thick. That would be used on any type of subdivision roads or mass grading of a site across South Texas. As far as the material that comes in is only going to be clean material. It's not going to have trash, pipe, tires, refrigerators. None of that stuff's going to be allowed, or we're going to load it right back up in the truck it came out of. It's not going to be a contaminated fill. That's all got to go down to Covell Gardens on the southwest side of town of San Antonio and be classified as a type 1 or 2 material. This is not what that's going to be. So all clean material. For instance, the subdivision that's just west of this, if it did have 12 or 15,000 yards of haul off of clean material, excavated clay, whatever is virgin in the ground, we would be more than happy to bring it here to level off the site and provide a better crash zone for Randolph.
Speaking of the subdivision, normally don't we send out letters?
So if I may, if the commissioner would permit, I think Megan may want to clarify what the application is before you. I think this one can be a little bit confusing.
So this is not a zoning case. This is just a UDC amendment to see where we would want to put such a use as aggregate extraction. So it's not allowing the use in GB, M1, M2. It's seeing, okay, if I think about where if we wanted to put it in that M1 or M2 district, thinking about where that is in the rest of the city. So it's not a zoning case to allow it at this moment. It's just to see what zoning district would we want this type of use to be located in.
Thank you. Educated.
So maybe to kind of chime in on a couple things. So with Chairperson Outlaw's kind of question, thought this would bring folks out. There was no notice provided to anyone, because all we're really doing, as Megan said, is we're taking that UDC where you see the list of uses we have and the little P or S or nothing on the various. We're adding a line that says aggregate extraction, and your job is to determine where we indicate it's allowed, which zoning districts, and where it's not allowed. So again, what I would tell you to do is, if you think about the whole city, where do we have different zoning districts, and do you think this is appropriate in light of the impacts and implications in any of those zoning districts? So if you think about it, you're going to pull up the zoning map.
Well, you're hitting where, I looked at a lot of that stuff, Brian, so you're going in the right direction, and it is a little confusing because typically we don't have a specific project in mind when these kinds of things come forward. But while Megan's bringing up the zoning map, it's certainly a good point. There's particularly in northern Schertz, if you bring just a little bit, there's a large amount of both M1, not so much M2, but there's a lot of M1, M2 up on the north side, north of IH-35.
Yep.
And certainly it's, again, that part of town, when you look up there, it's very sparsely populated. There's not a whole lot going on up there right now. Down south of Randolph, not so much. There's very little M1, and honestly, I don't remember if I saw any M2 down there.
There's probably not.
But one of the things that I thought of, and Megan mentioned it at the beginning, you know, we have, and I'll be very honest with you, this kind of operation generates a lot of public angst, okay? I want to stop short of calling it a public nuisance, okay? And we saw fit with concrete and asphalt batch plants to restrict them to M2, and even then it requires an SUP.
That's right.
So I'm kind of waffling back and forth on, you know, and honestly, I'm concerned that the houses you see are in Converse, okay?
Yep.
But I don't think it's fair for us to not consider our neighbors.
I agree entirely.
But I guess where I'm going with this is I think there is a place in the UDC for aggregate extraction. I'm not sure it should be a what do we call it, where it's a right. And so
Right.
I think regardless of where we put it, it should require an SUP.
And let me just say this, I think staff struggled with that too.
Yeah.
So we tried to get something down on paper, but because of the nature of the use, would not surprise us, we don't necessarily have a problem with going, there's a lot we need to look out,
Yeah.
particular that property, and so we're only going to allow it via SUP.
And you know, so where I was going with that is maybe it's appropriate in both M1 and M2, but only with a specific use permit, because that gives us greater control of exactly where we allow it, rather than allowing it by right. And it's also because listening to the applicant's presentation, you know, when somebody talks about aggregate extraction, you know what pops into mind is the quarry all this quarry activity going on around here with explosives and crushers and all that other good stuff. Well, see, but no, I'm telling you, that's the public perception. But with an SUP, if I'm not mistaken, that can be tailored. There can be certain restrictions added that if all they want to do is come up and dig it up and put it in the dump truck and haul it off, no crushers, no, you know, anything like that. I think the SUP would give us a little more control over that, where we could be a little more selective, if you will, about the projects we allow and those we don't. Is that a correct assumption?
So the SUP would be something that, just like, so we've seen like with the gas station, is that has that, you know,
Right.
site plan associated with it, so it does allow you to kind of see a more of a, you know, an idea of what the project would be to look like. So just to kind of reiterate, it's not a zoning case in a sense of, you know, we're allowing this use outright. It's to see what district would the commission like to see something of aggregate extraction be in.
And is this a recommendation to City Council? It doesn't say that here, but I think they have final say on the UDC amendments, right?
Yes, so this would go to City Council.
And, you know, the other thing that I thought about is we've got all that, you see all that land south of Randolph, and we have no idea what to do with it. Am I right? Because,
That's the challenge, I think.
and, you know, so if somebody wants to come and dig up, you know, they can, Mr. Buchholz can get some productive use out of his property. You know, I don't know. No, yeah. Yeah, well, you're not going to get any residential in the APZ, and so, yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. You know, we have this property south of Randolph, and what do we do with it? You know, yeah.
Some of my favorites are the assisted living facility, the bank. We could technically do that, and Randolph would not object to it.
Yeah, as long as you don't attract more birds. So, but that's kind of where I was going, commissioners. I don't necessarily have a. Although I found it interesting that I was curious to see why staff, you know, why concrete batch plants are in M2, but staff thought it was okay to put it extraction in M1, and I think you made your point. But I'm kind of leaning towards the recommendation that M1 or M2, but both requiring an SUP. I don't know, what do the rest of you think?
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I think we should stick with the Texas Administrative Code, specifically under this subchapter. It describes only industrial, commercial, and business uses. So manufacturing, industrial, I think would be perfect. It would fit in SUP, obviously, just like Mr. Chairman said.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
I don't have any question, but I do have just a quick statement.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, this is just it's not specifically to the project. Understand that completely. But it's step one for the project. So we're going to see more and more come from this, depending on what the recommendation is, what City Council does as well. So I think, talking about the project, we got several questions, but that could come up later on. That's not really the issue here. I agree with the chairman as far as the SUP goes. I don't think we should do anything by right with the M1 and M2 for aggregate extraction. I'd be afraid, especially for M1, all the areas to the north of I-35. I mean, that's so much M1 in there that we don't want to start seeing an expansion of the quarry that's already up there outside of Schertz. So seeing things like that come in here. I would almost, just looking at the zoning map, we don't have really much M2 out there at all that I could see. It's a dark gray
I think
color.
there might be.
Yeah, there's very little M2 up there, and I think it's just because no one's found a project yet that requires M2. So
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, as far as a special use permit on M1 and M2. I could see that. I could probably accept that.
well, again, it's council has the final decision, and but I think staff is correct in the fact that it needs to be addressed in the UDC somehow, and
So,
Yep.
Are there other M2 or M1 areas that have the APZ1 flyover?
no.
I've been to Brian, why not under GB or any of these zones?
Well, I'll be very honest with you, Mr. Buckholz. The issue is the nuisance to the people that live down there. Okay, and no, sir, I understand. I saw that. I got that from your presentation. I did, and that's. So we haven't had a motion yet, but the discussion seems to, the consensus seems to be heading towards, even if we recommend approval of, and council approves adding aggregate extraction to the UDC and M1 and M2 with SUPs, you still have to come in and rezone your property, and there's no guarantee that, given the fact that you have residential neighborhoods, there's no guarantee that'll get approved. Okay. Now I'm hoping with possibly with the whole SUP exercise that a project could be tailored to fit within. Now, let me just give you an example. If you were to the northeast there, that property that where you see the wide open, the next piece of wide open RA property, okay, it might be a little different there because you're a little further away from the neighbors. But again, getting back to the issue at hand, and the SUP would give staff, planning and zoning, and city commission the flexibility to look at a specific project, where it's going, tailor the operation of that function, because then you can call out certain restrictions, and maybe you can't go within 50 feet. Maybe around the houses you stop at 100 or 150, but you can do that with an SUP. So I'm trying. Well, I say I think the thought process is we keep a little flexibility. We're not just going to slam the door on everybody. Okay, we at least give them the opportunity. All right, commissioners, I'm talking too much. Who else wants to talk?
Would we be looking for approval or denial? And if approval with conditions, as we stated, SUP required, only industrial manufacturing?
I think, Mr. James, help me out here, that we could make a recommendation to City Council to approve the addition of aggregate extraction to the UDC in zoning areas M1 and M2, both requiring an SUB.
Yep, you can do that.
If we want to do that.
Just looking at the map right now, sir, the landfill, M2. I would be more comfortable with M2 with an SUP for projects such as this. Putting it on M1, I think it opens up a little bit too much. Not liability, but just too much possibility of future projects to the north that we would deem undesirable.
And not necessarily disagreeing with you, but that's the purpose of the SUP. Because we have, and again, my thinking is because we have a whole ton of, particularly up north, we've got a lot of M1. And even throughout the city, there's very little M2. So in some of these wide open areas, it might be perfectly acceptable to allow aggregate extension even in an M1. It just it would depend on what's around it. And the SUP allows us to say, again, the thought process is that an SUP would be required in either zoning district, and that gives us the option to say, no, you can't put it there, even in M1 or M2. If there's some reason that, the commission or the council feels that, I'm just reluctant to, and of course, the motion is yours to make. I'm just reluctant to restrict it to M2 because there is so little M2 in the city. It doesn't keep people from, as I said, Mr. Buckholz is going to have to come in and rezone this anyway. He could come in and, if we restrict it to M2, he might come in and ask for M2. But you've got to remember, when we look at rezoning property, we're looking at what's around it. And to come in and try to drop an M2 in the middle of a bunch of RA, M1, honestly, M1 might be something. Again, I have to go back and look at the APZs. There's the clear zone just to the north. You can't build anything. Period. That's why they call it a clear zone. APZ1, the accident potential is a little bit higher, a little bit lower than the clear zone, so they allow some things in there, and that maybe that should be M1 instead of GB, So anyway, that's just my thought process, and I understand your concerns, but the SUP would give us the ability to. If the property is zoned M1, the SUP would give us the ability to say, no, not there. No, sir, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry.
You got a couple.
Bear with us. We'll work it out eventually, okay?
Couple of questions, comments,
Go ahead.
Chair. Considering where we live and where the city of Schertz is, I'm surprised we've survived this long without this definition, so I think it's needed in some form or fashion. Secondly, does our definition cover thoroughly all of the possible situations where there's aggregate removal and put back? Our neighbors to the north, New Braunfels, they've got it all over the place, and it's ugly, and it's unsightly. Have we looked at their definition to see that we have a complete definition so we don't have to do this again?
I have not.
No, we can certainly do that. So again, in kind of valid point. So what we could do is check the surrounding cities if you'd like, look at all of the definitions of different sort of related uses, you know, like for a quarry, for concrete batch plant, for aggregate, and provide you those. Happy to do that. Valid point. And so
Yeah, because our, you know, the one that's, I mean, you haven't highlighted specifically what the definition would be unless you're going to extract it from what you gave us in the staff summary. But what's in the staff summary, is that complete? Does that cover everything? I'd like to make sure we do that before we vote and accept something and then we have to change it.
So to be clear, we think that covers the definition of what we're trying to define as a use. You could have somebody come in with something 2 weeks from now, we look at it and say, nope, that's not aggregate extraction, doesn't fall into that. That is something else, and we need to run a use and a definition of that. So this was not intended to be all-encompassing. It was frankly intended to respond to what the applicant wanted to do, and when we looked at common definitions, they were more broad than soil, in part because of how TCQ requires the registration.
Okay, if staff is thoroughly happy with it, then I'll be happy with it.
Happy.
Anyone else? All right, so on PC 2021-036, we'll be making a recommendation to City Council, and we can recommend approval, we can recommend denial, we can recommend approval with a modification.
Bear with me while I try to read this. I took some notes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend approval with conditions on PC 2021-036. The conditions being that it would require an SUP for M1 and M2, and that the definition, as previously brought up, mirrors the language in the administrative code that covers aggregate extraction.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Platt to recommend approval of amending the UDC to include aggregate extraction in M1 with an SUP and M2 with an SUP, and that the definition of aggregate extraction be in accordance with the state code, correct?
Correct.
Is that going to be an issue for staff?
No.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a second from Commissioner Goldick. Just real quick, Commissioner Platt, do you have that definition handy? I mean, I'm just curious what the differences are, if any.
It just gets into a little more detail and clarifies what is considered aggregate extraction. For instance, the first 12 feet of clay or topsoil is not included in the admin code. And then there's a few other things in there that are just a little bit different.
Okay. But if I heard, and again, we're trying to amend the UDC, not approve the applicants. But if I heard him say the first layer or two thereafter is clay, and so you're saying that would not be included.
That wouldn't be required to have approval for aggregate extraction. They can just do that by right on the state level.
Everyone understand that? I mean, to make sure I understand it, then you're saying if we use the definition, because now I'm confused. And as somebody said on a video I watched earlier, I'd like to be unconfused. Okay. It's nice to have things in conformance. What we're trying to do here is put limitations and require certain zoning and permits before somebody digs a big hole in the ground. Okay. And so you're telling me the state says if all they're pulling out of there is clay and not gravel or caliche or something like that, then they wouldn't have to comply. They could just go out there and strip the land and pull it out.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's Title 30, Part 1, Chapter 342, Subchapter A.
Can you say that again, Mr. Putt?
Sure. Title 30, Part 1, Chapter 342, Subchapter A. And that defines what an aggregate production operation as well as aggregates are defined as.
Anyone have any further questions or comments? Call for
Well, I do.
Go ahead.
It just adds more questions, and I guess I had a whole sheet of questions, but they would come up at the SUP discussion. But one of my main concerns is protecting Randolph. And if we allow, I guess if a property owner was gonna go and take out 12 feet of clay, does the city have any control of that? Is that earth moving, or what do we call it?
Clearing and grading?
Yeah.
So they would be required to pull a clearing and grading permit through the engineering department. So anytime you disturb a tenth of an acre or more, you're required to pull a clearing and grading permit through engineering.
Okay, and so engineering, the approval of that would be solely in the engineering department?
Yes.
Is that good or bad? Because again, when you read the letter from Randolph, the Randolph says, okay, we don't mind if you do this, as long as you don't cause a lot of dust and you don't cause a lot of light problems and everything else. Okay, who's going to be the judge of that?
So, but just to kind of build upon that though, so if we are going to say that you would be required to be in an M1 or M2 zoning, they still have to go to Randolph and get essentially permission or approval from Randolph before they can even ever come back to the city of Schertz for the rezone. So they are providing a letter of no objection for their use. They still have to, if it gets through city council and city council says we approve, the M1, M2 zoning with the SUP, they still are required to go to Randolph Air Force Base and provide them, the documentation that they are going to go through the rezoning process. And if Randolph says yes, then they can proceed with the city of Schertz. If Randolph says no, they are not allowed to proceed with the city of Schertz.
Because I was really going to save all this till sometime later at another meeting, but the motion brought up this, and I think the motion is going to make it a little bit more detailed.
I want to be clear too with what the intent of the motion is, and maybe this again goes to your question, Commissioner Bro. So again, there are certain kinds of activities, work one wants to do that requires permit. So if you want to do any kind of work in the city's right-of-way, you have to pull a public works permit. If you want to move dirt around, you have to pull a clearing and grading permit. If you want to build a building, you got to get a building permit. What we're talking here, though, or the intent is the zoning. So again, if you want to pull a building permit and it's for a residence or it's for a restaurant, the zoning has to allow either a residence or a restaurant. And so if the intent of Commissioner Platt is to say, look, you don't have to have any particular zoning to take out the top 12 feet of clay. You can do it in a residential district, you can do it in a commercial district, you can do it in an industrial district. We're going to just let you do that by right. We're not going to make it a zoning issue. It's only if you go 12 feet, deeper than 12 feet. That can be the recommendation of the commission. I will tell you, staff does not support that. We feel like when you start coming in and your inherent goal is to pull dirt out and move it in, not as part of some other construction project, not as part of, hey, I've got to build an industrial building, I need to level the site, so I need to bring some dirt in. That, to us, is really a means to an end as opposed to what this is, which an end in and of itself. The whole point of it is to sell dirt, be paid to take dirt in. And again, staff's recommendation is if you're moving dirt, and I'm using that very, very broadly, as clay, soil, rock, whatever, that we think needs to be defined as a use, much like one would be a quarry, whatever it is you're quarrying out of there, and needs to have because of those impacts from it. And that's, again, valid opinion, just to be clear where staff comes from.
And let me clarify, just from where I was coming from, and I don't want the city and the UDC to be more restrictive than the state regulations.
Sure.
And that's my only concern, just the way it's worded there, as staff would define aggregate extraction as, is a little more restrictive than what.
It's significantly more restrictive than the state. The state basically says you can take the top 12 feet out, we don't care. It's only if you go deeper than that. As city staff, we think if that's your primary activity, if you take a foot out, we care. Again, if you're a farmer and you're moving dirt, we have a way to deal with that. That's a whole different thing. If you're moving dirt on site as part of a building permit that you're building the site, that's a different thing. But if this is your sole intent, yeah, staff takes a very restrictive view of it, and we think it needs to be very carefully reviewed as to where that's appropriate and where it's not. Otherwise, for instance, the property just up Schertz Parkway before you hit Woodland Oaks, they could come in and say, we're going to take out 10 feet and we're going to sell that, and say, I can't do anything about it. So.
And considering the flooding issues we have around here, I agree with you. We need to be involved in it somehow.
After hearing your explanation, I kind of agree. So would you like me to resubmit the motion?
It's your motion. You can certainly amend it if you'd like to.
I would like to amend my motion and motion to approve PC 2021-036 with conditions, which specify a requirement for SUP for M1 and M2.
All right, and Commissioner Goldick, you seconded that. Would you? Does your second stand on the amended motion? Okay.
No, I hear you.
Anyone else? All right, I'll call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, that's 6 ayes, none opposed, for a recommendation to City Council to add aggregate extraction to the UDC in M1 with an SUP and M2 with an SUP. Thank you. Item 5A is another public hearing, ZC 2021-010. Consider and make a recommendation on a request to rezone approximately 45 acres of land from general business to manufacturing M1, generally located approximately 1,300 feet east of Friesenhahn Lane and 450 feet north of IH-35 Access Road, also known as Comal County Property Identification Numbers 150166 and 81285, City of Schertz, Comal County, Texas.
Good evening, Commission. So as Commissioner Alice stated, this is for ZC 2021-010 for the zone change from general business to manufacturing light. So just to provide reference, the property is outlined here in green. Here is IH-35 and then Friesenhahn Lane. And then just for another point of reference, this is Schwab. So we did send out 4 public hearing notices within the 200-foot buffer of the subject property on August 10th. So here is the zoning exhibit illustrating that they will be moving that M1 zoning district down into what is previously the GB. So the next slide, I think, will better illustrate this. So again, this is the property outlined in pink. So what is currently the general business zoning district, they are now requesting to bring that M1 zoning district down. They are going to be keeping approximately 450 feet of the general business zoning district along the IH-35 frontage road. So a little bit different than what we've kind of seen in previous zonings is that they are going to be keeping that GB zoning along the front. So the Schertz sector plan is compatible, as it does have the light manufacturing office, flex office type use. It does promote kind of preserve kind of having it at a mid-block location. And so with this rezone, it does really do speak to that, having it located at the mid-block and kind of at a campus-like environment. So it is keeping that industrial kind of flex office use in the back with still keeping that general business with the office, retail, service uses along the frontage of 35. So just kind of also going back to the aerial, so the compatibility that, the staff did look at is that, you have Cisco, and then you also have the Amazon Distribution Center that is also within that M1 zoning district as well. So with that, based on the subject property's location, the adjacent zoning, and the land uses, and the comprehensive land use designation, the proposed zone change is compatible. So with all of that, the staff does make a recommendation to allow the rezone from general business designation to the manufacturing light M1. The applicant is here if there are questions, but I do not believe they have a presentation. There's no presentation, but they are here for questions.
All right, thank you, Megan. Okay, once again, it's a public hearing. Anyone wishing to address the commission on this topic is welcome to step forward. And Mr. Dye, you're going to defer your... No comments? Okay. All right. Anybody else? One more time. All right, public input is closed. Commissioners?
I'll go ahead and start out. With a case like this, with its zoning, so we're not necessarily looking at the project itself, but my question would be why? Why do we want to, or why does the applicant want to change this to M1? What's the project? What are they looking at utilizing in this space? Why can't it be GB?
Robert, it's name and address, I guess. Yeah, Robert Dye, 3625 North Hall Street, Suite 1280, Dallas, Texas 75219. The reason that we were wanting to rezone this section of the property is based on the portion that we are buying. The majority of it, if it goes all the way back to what is David Lack now. This is the only piece of the property that we're buying that isn't M1. And what we're trying to do, and what we were looking at when we originally submitted our site plan, we have the front of one of our industrial warehouses that kind of sits over the front of this line, but that's where all the office is going to be. But after conversations with staff, they recommended that we should come in with a zoning change to make it a little bit more cleaner. So the front part of this site is going to be 2 office complexes, no doors, facing the street, and just a parking lot. And so what we're trying to do for simplicity of future sales and everything else is just make everything M1 so it's one zoning, and that's kind of the intent behind this. And so the goal is still to leave GB everywhere else for retail, restaurants, and other uses along the front of the property.
Perfect, thanks, appreciate it.
No problem.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Dye.
So just also kind of want to provide too, as Lisa and I were kind of discussing, they do have their preliminary plat in the process right now, kind of just a very draft, kind of still conceptual. And so just kind of want to illustrate, so like Robert did kind of say, we do have several parcels, and this parcel kind of being where that yellow hash is the only parcel that they have that is in that GB zoning, and so that is the area that they're trying to request the M1, just because, kind of what kind of building upon what Mr. Dye did say is that, staff did kind of have a little bit of concern, that yes, you do have offices now, but, later down the road, if uses change or, tenants change and that warehouse kind of starts coming into question, we don't want to be, 2 years, 3 years down the road and, a section of the building is not meeting the zoning district. And so that's why we recommended to do that. And they, were amenable to that, as well as keeping that GB district along the frontage of 35.
And I know it's difficult, commissioners. I fall into that mode myself a lot. Our charge here is not project specific. It's a zoning request, and the only question that we should be addressing is whether or not it's appropriate to to rezone this property from GB to M1, not necessarily what's going to end up being built on the property. Now, I think if you bring the aerial up, the overhead, there you go. Certainly, we just went through this at the last meeting, I believe, where we were looking at light industrial along the frontage, and that was a very difficult one for us and for City Council. In this case, we're not doing that. We've done this before, where we've readjusted the boundary between M1 and GB. We've done that several times up here along 35. When you look at what else is up there, you're looking at, that's Cisco, and right behind it there, that's I don't know who, Amazon's in there now. That's the old Lax warehouse. So, I guess the only, really the question here is moving that M1 line closer to Interstate 35. That's the question that we've asked ourselves several times in looking at that property up there and trying to balance maintaining some interstate frontage with accommodating the needs and the market, if you will, of what people are looking to do up there. I'm sure I could find it, but I'm too lazy to look again. How much of that, what is that GB frontage now?
It's approximately going to be 450.
450 feet deep. Okay.
Kind of on one side, and it kind of tapers about 467 feet.
Okay, as opposed to what? Go to your next slide. Well, maybe it was the one before. I thought there was one, that one there.
So originally it would have been a 700
Yeah.
feet. So another example to kind of think of that we did do this GB and M1 kind of coming down was the 18735 IH35 property. Obviously a very smaller scale, but that is one that kind of did some of the similar, bringing that M1 district down, but still keeping that GB along the frontage to allow that retail office space.
Yeah. One of the things, what's the use, what does the land use plan say here again?
Commercial campus.
Similar to what we were looking at before. And again, a lot of the discussion, I'm sure, and I hope you folks watched the discussion that took place at the council meetings over the last similar project. And the discussion about mid-block versus intersections and that whole discussion. And I will admit that we're flirting with one of those commercial corners here, okay? Unfortunately, my iPad won't show me the zoning map and the agenda at the same time, so I keep flipping back and forth here.
That right corner there is going to be that Quick Trip that we approved.
Yeah, so on the hard corner of Schwab and IH35 is going to be the Quick Trip.
It's actually up the interstate.
Right, a little more north.
At the next intersection. So I was just, let me look here. I had it earlier. Trying to find Friesenhahn. So, well, I'm sorry, Megan, you're showing it to us right there. So we're still looking at probably 350 feet of GB frontage on Friesenhahn. So, trying to assess and preserve that corner for, what do you call it, retail?
Retail, office, service uses.
So, kind of a judgment call here, but again, we've done this several times in the past where we've moved that M1, we've moved that M1 zoning a little bit to accommodate the property owner. Any other comments or questions? This will be a recommendation to City Council to either approve or deny the request to rezone it. And please, my intention is not to shut you folks down, and I apologize if anybody takes it that way. You know, this is an open forum, and I appreciate everybody's comments. So
I'll make a motion here to request approval for ZC 2021-010.
we have a motion to recommend approval from Commissioner Haynes. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
And that was Commissioner Odom.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments? I'll say it once again. I wish we had a crystal ball and we could really see what's, you know, it's hard to sit here and rezone properties and rearrange things without really knowing what's coming in the future. But yeah, my financial advisor says that all the time too. All right. No further comments or questions? I'll call a vote.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. 6 ayes, none opposed. That motion passes. Thank you, sir. Item number 6, items for individual consideration. 6A, PC 2021-035, consider and act upon a request for approval of a replat of the Charles Bolton subdivision, lots 5, 6, and 7, an approximately 1 acre tract of land generally located at the hard corner of Main Street and Schertz Parkway, City of Schertz, Guadalupe County, Texas. Commissioners, this is the item that we tabled at the last meeting. Oh,
Correct.
Megan?
So just kind of, I guess, go quickly on the first part. So the property is outlined here in green at the hard corner of Schertz Parkway and Main Street. Here is the replat exhibit, but the next plat exhibit I think is going to be the best illustration as to concerns that were had at the last P&Z. So the Urban Renewal Agency of the City of Schertz was created in the mid-1960s to improve streets, parks in the older parts of Schertz. So with that being said, they did acquire about 1/3 of Lot 7. So as you can see here in the purple, and they acquired about 5.5 feet off the top of all 3 of these lots. So with that, this parcel is known as 16631. So the plat exhibit itself is not illustrated incorrectly. It is just demonstrated simply as that it's part of the right-of-way. So the plat is still the 3 lots, lot 5, 6, and 7, but I think this illustration does kind of help kind of display that as what the urban renewal acquired and then dedicated back to the City of Schertz, which then in turn became right-of-way, such as Schertz Parkway and Main Street.
It does, Megan. Thank you very much. You back up one slide. Well, yeah, that's the one. Here's my issue, it's not really an issue, but what I don't see is, see, it appears to me that plat line, the property line, goes right up to Schertz Parkway because the plat doesn't show the right-of-way that it doesn't include. It's just the way they draw the plat. So your drawing where you included the extra piece on the end, that's, I think, what we all needed to see. Thank you. And I was telling someone earlier that when you go out to the appraisal district and you look at their map and you click on these properties, they will only show you 2 lots.
Yes,
But
as they
when
have
you
combined
click-
6 and
When
7.
you click on lot 6, it will tell you in the text that it includes part of lot 7.
Correct.
And when you go and click on the city property adjacent to it, it will tell you that it includes part of. So the problem is when whoever made the drawing at the appraisal district, you know, rather than leaving that partial lot 7 in there, they took it out. So it was just, but your drawing, sir, it cleared it up for me anyway. Okay, anyone else? And this one is for our action.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve PC 2021-035 for the replat of the Charles Bolton subdivision lots 5, 6, and 7.
Second.
Who is that? Commissioner Platt. All right. So we have a motion to approve PC 2021-0535 from Commissioner Odom and a second from Commissioner Platt. Do we have any further discussion, questions? Call for the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. 6 ayes, none opposed. That motion passes. Okay, item number 7, requests and announcements. Item A, request by commissioners to place items on a future planning and zoning agenda. Anyone have anything they'd like to see? Okay, item B, announcements by commissioners.
I have an announcement.
Go ahead, sir.
I have a letter of resignation that I submitted to you, Chairman Outlaw, to be forwarded to Brenda Dennis. It reads, this letter is to serve as notification. I'll be resigning my position on the City of Schertz Planning and Zoning Commission following the September 22nd, 2021 meeting. We'll be moving out of the city and I will no longer meet the resident requirement to serve. It's been an honor and privilege to volunteer and serve as P&Z Commissioner, and I thank you all for allowing me that experience. I wish you all the best as Terry and I turn the page and begin another chapter in the adventure we call life. Onward.
Well, I think I can certainly speak for the commission that we certainly appreciate the time that you've given us and given the city in sitting in that seat for a while. And sorry to see you go. Anyone else? I will not be here. I will let you all know I will not be here for the first meeting in October. We haven't seen our grandson in quite a while, and so we'll be in Mississippi. So, anybody else? All right, let's see. Announcements by city staff.
We have no announcements.
What have you been doing for the last 2 weeks? Huh?
Plats, zoning, UDC amendments,
All right. I'm just giving you our
Subcommittee work.
subcommittee work.
Coming up with new diagrams for old farts, yeah. All right, item number 8, there is an information available that the staff briefed us, gave us the current status on some of the projects that are in front of the city council. And there be no further business. This meeting is adjourned. Jimmy, I really do mean that.